I went to see my therapist a couple weeks ago, and he had a really good suggestion for me. And it's actually something I've managed to implement. And the problem with dealing with any sort of psychological exercise or I guess kind of attempt to change your perception, etc., is it's very, very hard to stick. Like an almost immeasurable gap between being aware of something and being able to believe something. Knowing and believing are two very different things. Like you can know your thoughts are irrational, but getting yourself to believe your thoughts are irrational is another thing entirely. You might realize that people don't hate you rationally, but emotionally you believe that they do. So I was talking to my therapist, and he was saying, uh, let's take a step back and let's look at kind of what are some of the big issues of stress in your life. And I was talking about how I just feel dread towards a lot of things. Like every time I send an email, every time I call, almost any time I make a video or any time I go online, I feel this sense of dread that things are going to somehow end in a cataclysmic fashion. And he said, okay, that makes sense. A lot of people have that issue. What I found helps people is let's take a step back. So you say when you send an email you're scared you're going to get yelled at by your boss. And I said, yes. He goes, how often does that actually happen? From a pure probabilistic perspective, how often do you actually get yelled at because of something in an email? Um, and I'm like, well, it used to be more often, but I guess maybe like 5% of the time, if that. And he's like, okay, then does it make sense to be worried about it? And I'm like, no, it really doesn't make sense at all. And he goes, what I want you to do is whenever you feel a sense of dread, I want you to think back to the previous times you've done this and go, what are the actual odds that something bad is going to happen? How many times have you interacted with this person without trouble? How many times have you brought this issue up? How many times have you sent this person an email, etc., etc.? And try to put your dread in that context to try to kind of because it's a large portion of dealing with mental illness is recentering your mind and trying to peel away some of the subjective terror and replacing it with kind of objective reality because very often for the depressed person the greatest monsters aren't without, they're within. The prison of your own mind is often worse than anything anybody outside of yourself can do to you. So that's just a very short and very useful exercise. So just repeat whenever you feel scared of something or dread towards something, take a step back and think what are the actual possibilities that this is going to go wrong? What's the actual possibility this is going to be as bad as I think it is? And while there is many cases in life where it is something to be scared of, those tend to often be kind of extraordinary things or the vast majority of kind of things we dread are very mundane things that we encounter on a daily basis. A lot of the things that we need to have dread towards are not nearly as common. So you may look at it and you may say, okay, I have a good reason to be afraid of it. And in that case, I guess then your dread's justified. But that's not every case, and that's not a majority of cases. So if you can strip away some of the things that cause you this anxiety, that cause you kind of this sense of impending doom, then that'll help a lot. And part of this is it's a process. You're not going to get rid of all your anxiety overnight. You're not going to magically cure yourself overnight, but it's a step. And that's how you have to deal with mental illness. You always have to be taking a step forward, even if it's a baby step. It's a very long, some might say a lifelong road to recovery and to curing it. You can't really cure it, but you can constantly heal it, I guess, if that makes sense. Healing from mental illness is a lifelong process. So that's just a little bit of advice. That's a little tip for you. Hope it was helpful.